to be imported. As simple as that. And therefore, we don't have sufficient face masks for our health workers, for security workers, and for the public. This is something that can be ramped up if we had a manufacturing sector, a textile manufacturing sector worth its name. We ramp this up. But do we? We have become so import dependent. The other critical thing, ventilators. Somebody jokingly said we have more ministers than number of ventilators across the whole health sector. The fact that somebody can even link these two means we have very inadequate number of ventilators in our health sector. We have schools of engineering. We have schools, if you go to University of Ghana, they do medical engineering. We have the capability and the facilities. But have we averted our minds to these things? No, we are more interested in procuring from outside because of the windfalls from procurement. Unfortunately, I'm talking about Ghana as a nation state. So as a collective, do we have our priorities? Because we don't have our priorities right, we end up in situations where our president, who embodies the nation, the persona of the nation state, makes a statement of all frontline workers, and we are struggling to define frontline workers, frontline health workers. We are struggling. Because of this, if you take, for example, the water, the free water supply for what percentage of population is served by Ghana Water? A small percentage. Look, the bulk of the country in terms of landmass is served by inadequately by community water and sanitation agency through boreholes and other systems. These are not metered. If you take Accra, Kumasi, where the majority of people live, the not posh areas, I don't want to say the slums, the not posh areas, a lot of them depend on boreholes and tanker services. And yet, we make blanket statements. Water in the affected areas should go for free. Do we even distill the idea to know where that water is coming from? And I'm very, very, very worried about this seemingly good policy that receive uninformed public applause, and yet impacts negatively on the nation state. You take electricity. Those on Lifeline, 0 to 50 kilowatt hours, should go for free. Who are the real beneficiaries in Accra of the Lifeline? The real beneficiaries of a Lifeline in Accra are not the poor. Absolutely not. And this is something that the Ministry of Energy or the former Ministry of Power had been battling with. We have identified the fact that the poor are not necessarily those on Lifeline. In Accra, no. Because the poor generally live in compound houses. We've been unable to meter individual rooms in compound houses. If you have a compound house in Mamobi with 10, 12, 15 tenants, assuming each individual even consumes the 50 or 40, 10 rooms, we're already around 400. not only do they lose the benefit of Lifeline, but it shoves them into a higher band. There is 0 to 50, there's 51 to 200, it used to be up to 150 to 200, there's 200 and above, and each band has a higher tariff. So because we live in a compound house and we have 1 meter, our consumption shows us into a very high tariff band. And yet this policy is meant for the poor. And this is no rocket science. It's just intellectual laziness that we don't identify this and they make provision. Go to airport residential area where the rich live. In most of the houses, the main house is metered and the boys' quarters is metered. Who lives in the boys' quarters? The housemaid and probably the garden boy. 1 fridge, 1 TV. And so the consumption in the boys' quarters will fall under Lifeline. So that's relatively well-off man or woman living in airport residential will pay the Lifeline tariff for his or her boys' quarters, whereas the needy, the real poor, for whose relief this policy is put in place, pays a higher tariff because the aggregate consumption in that household falls under a higher band. We've known this. Yet, we find it difficult to come out with policies which address our real need. The symbolism is too important to us. Oh, President Ayade, how does it impact on the person that is actually supposed to be the beneficiary? Too often, very little impact, if any at all. That is only one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is the utility. If you take Ghana Water Company or Electricity Company of Ghana, it's owned by you and I. 100% state owned. It's owned by us. We are the owners. When government, in 2014, I was the chairman of the Committee of Mines and Energy of Parliament. The government of the NDC, PULC, announced a tariff adjustment, upward adjustment. The government of the NDC came out and said they will absorb the increase, the adjustment. I came out and said, no, it was a wrong decision. Of course, I was lambasted by some members of my party, and others even saw me as betraying the cause. But please, we've been involved in this long enough to know things that work and things which do not work. At the minimum, I've been at the PNDC secretary since 1982. Projects and programs with Nyaya and Comrade, a whole team. We've been through this. And that is my hate. That as a people, we don't even learn from our own history. And so we continue making the same mistakes. Criticized, I was taken on, but our entities were not paid by the state. And therefore, the financial weakness is exacerbated of the entity. And that is where the background from which I come. I say, look, if His Excellency the President wants some relief for consumers, I'm all for it. However, and I know the Ghanaian state will not pay. Let's not deceive ourselves. Look, if you are sitting at the Ministry of Finance, at the end of the month, the revenue is not coming. You have to pay salaries, you have to do debt servicing, you have to do this. The last on your priority is payment to ECG, to Ghana Water, where officials will not even benefit personally. There's no thank you from that. So these entities are the last to be paid, assuming the money is even available. More often than not, the money is not available. So what I subscribe to is for the state reducing or eliminating the taxes and levies on this provision. If you take fuel, for example, on the average, about 30% of the price of a gallon of petrol or diesel is made up of taxes, levies, and margins. So rather than the Ghanaian state saying that I'm paying for it, which it will never pay, governments have control over the taxes, the levies, etc. So let's remove those levies. That is within the domain of government. If we were to remove the levies on water, on electricity, your bill will come down. And at least government can say, I have shown commitment to relieving the suffering of the people in a way that is sustainable. I can assure you, after the 3 months, and remember, unlike water, electricity is concentrated in Accra, Tema, Kumasi, Takoradi. Finish. Tema alone, the Tema region, consumes more power. Tema alone consumes more power than 57% of the country, the NETCO area, which is part largely Bron and Hafo, a little bit of North Ashanti, Upper East, Upper West, Northern region, all of them combined. Tema alone consumes more power than the whole of the NETCO region. And so if you're saying that you are subsidizing or you are going to pay 50% for power in Tema, Accra, Kumasi, we're going to run into, at the very minimum, in my calculation, we're looking at about 2 billion Ghana cedis. Where is that going to come from? State revenues are down already. Every state's revenue is down across the globe because of this COVID-19. So where are we going to borrow in order to pay ECG? We won't do that. And therefore, ECG and the utilities will suffer. COVID is over, thank God. And I believe COVID will be over in the next couple of months. At least the pandemic aspect of it will be over. We'll face the reality. The utilities will go to PURC. This is my balance sheet. If I don't get an adjustment, the utility, my company, cannot even service its debt obligations. Already we have Ghana Water Company complaining that as a result of our own indiscipline, Galamsey, the cost of treatment had shot up. A legitimate technical and economic case before PURC. PURC will have no other option. PURC is a referee to mediate between the interests of consumers and the interests of the utilities. You have no option than to approve an increased tariff. So ultimately, you and I are going to pay. In any case, if they use our taxes in paying, we are still paying. So how well do we target these social interventions? I'm not saying that social interventions are not needed. They are very needed. But one, they must be properly targeted. The lifeline, how many poor households will really benefit from the lifeline? Very few. Because of the architecture of our housing. Don't we know this? We do. So why must we repeat these same errors of the past? We own the utilities. They are limited liability companies. Shareholders have a responsibility to recapitalize when the entities face a cash crunch or when they have inadequate working capital. You and I are the shareholders.